The Oort Perimeter, Chapter 15. Philand looked up as his computer beeped. On the display was a message indicating a secure communication. He typed in his access code and waited as the call connected. To his surprise, Corbin and Dr. Bach appeared on the display. "Well, good afternoon, gentlemen. To what do I owe the pleasure?" he asked. "We have good news for you. We've been looking into the issue that the Fondos have with EUTDs, and I believe we may have a solution for you," said Bach. "Already? Will you be able to give them EUTDs soon?" "Well, that's the problem. There's still a lot of work we need to do, and we have only the limited medical information provided to us by Ambassador Finch to work with. So we're calling to see if you can provide us with some live specimens to work with," said Corbin. Philand blinked in surprise. "Live specimens? Good Lord! Do you actually want to experiment on living Fondos just to solve this dilemma?" Bach waved his hands dismissively. No. We're not saying that. What we're wanting is bring some of them here, including a few members of their own medical community, and scan them in detail with the hope of gaining better insights into Fondo anatomy. Having actual, living subjects from which we can collect more accurate physiological data than we presently have would greatly speed our work. That's why we're hoping you can talk to Ambassador Finch and see if his people would be willing to send over someone to work with us on this project. That way we can kill two birds with one stone, with the goal of not actually killing anyone. Because, without that additional data, we're very likely to do exactly that. Okay, so let me get this straight. You want to invite a group of Fondo doctors and citizens to Sol Space to help you solve this problem with EUTDs, and while they're there, you want to use them to create computerized biological templates for your experiments? Am I correct in that assumption, or am I completely off in left field on this?" said Philand. Bach nodded. "No, you're correct. If we can get those templates, it'll go a long ways towards helping us solve this problem, while avoiding any unwanted surprises as we help them take the first steps out into the wonders of the wet-jacked life. Does the Chancellor agree with this?" "Yeah. We already talked with him, and he's fully behind this. So, if you can talk to Ambassador Finch sometime soon, and have him send us a few doctors to help with this work, we would be immensely grateful." "All right, I'll go talk to him right now and see what I can do. I kinda expect that he'll be quite excited to hear this." "Good, let us know what you find out." "I will." Mobiek, Fleet Admiral for the Varnock 27th Armada, commonly known as the Black Fleet because of the jet-black color of its ships, sat on the veranda of his large, stately mansion and looked out across the colorful, picturesque hills that spread out before him. Nearby were two large, gurgling pools of water that bubbled and foamed violently as a variety of assorted sea creatures viciously fought each other in an arena-style battle for survival. In the Admiral's scaly-webbed hand was a crude silver cup filled with a thick, blood-like drink. He tossed it gently from side to side as he thought about the day's events. As he did, the Varnock prophet appeared from behind a nearby statue. "What do you want?" growled Mobiek, sensing his presence. The prophet tossed his hood back and fluttered his gills. "Your senses are still as sharp as ever, I see," he replied with a sly grin. "Dispense with the civilities." "Why are you here?" asked Mobiek in a gruff, almost perturbed voice. "The master has need of your services," replied the prophet. Mobiek's hand grew still as he pursed his lips in thought. "The Chapaji?" he asked. The prophet nodded, but said nothing. Mobiek gave a growling snort as though bothered by the answer. "When?" he asked. "As soon as you're ready," replied the prophet. "What about the Gaik Vaughn?" "They will not interfere, as their hands will be tied with legal formalities so that they can do nothing to hinder your mission." Mobiek contemplated this for several moments, and then said, "I will need time to prepare my fleet. Tell the master I will come when I am ready. He already knows. That is why I have come at this time, so that you have sufficient opportunity to make your preparations." Mobiek glanced slightly over his shoulder, and said, "Understood. I will move as soon as I am able, and will leave no Chapaji alive." The prophet smiled. "The master will be pleased to hear that." Mobiek fluttered his gills slightly. I pray you will. Sin gently cradled a purplish flower in his hand, and said, I'm surprised these are thriving so well here. Normally they require a much colder climate to survive in. Phylan grinned. The plant itself doesn't need the cold as much as its roots do. It's planted in a special section of the gardens in which the ground is kept at a steady 2 degrees Celsius, that's 23 degrees galactic scale. It's similar to the issues they had to overcome in order to allow those maple trees over there to survive in the gardens. But that seems pretty normal for the gardens, as they have to do something special for every single plant in here in order for each of them to survive and live in harmony with one another, given their dissimilar natural environments. Sin perked up at this. You have maple trees here? I didn't know there were any earth plants here in this garden, said Sin in surprise. Phylan shrugged. There wouldn't be any if our previous chancellor hadn't talked them into it. He figured that if there were plants and trees here from nearly every other member republic, then why not some from Earth? Thankfully the people who managed the gardens agreed. Are there any other earth plants here? I believe there are also some tulips, a few species of grass, and possibly some daisies. Aside from those, I'm not sure how many other earth plants there are. All of that dates from before my tenure here, so I'm not sure of what all they put in here besides those. And I only know about those because of my occasional walks through the gardens. Sin nodded. Interesting. I will have to see them someday. I agree. You really should. Just then Finch casually stepped out from between a pair of nearby bushes as he chewed quietly on several tufts of grass that dangled from his mouth. Sin looked at him curiously. Why are you grazing on the plants here? He asked. Finch swallowed the mouthful of grass and smiled. I am partaking in a delicacy from my world known as featherweed. It was brought here for both the beautification of this garden, and as a treat for myself, said Finch. Sin chuckled. You are an interesting creature, Ambassador. Despite all I know about you, there isn't a day goes by that I don't learn something new, he said with smile. There's always something to learn around here, chuckled Phylan. Speaking of which, what have you learned so far about our mysterious malefactor? Sin frowned. Very little, I'm afraid, much to my regret. Even so, I have confirmed several theories. Such as? There is a hidden, malevolent force working behind the scenes in the galaxy. And one who is secretly controlling the Varnock and driving their activities and malice against you. However, unfortunately, I was unable to discover who that was. But, I have a feeling that the Juana are somehow involved, either directly or indirectly. Them again, said Phylan in disgust. Regrettably, yes. I didn't get much else out of the ambassador, but I did leave him with something to think about. Well, that's always good. Any other progress? Sin shook his head. None, I'm afraid. Phylan frowned. Don't feel bad. I got about as far as you did with several of the ambassadors I've met with recently about the subject. A few were understandably cordial and did provide me with what little they knew. But ultimately it left me back where I started. Sin turned and looked at Finch. And what of you, my fine feathered friend? What have you learned? He asked. Finch shook his head. I have gallowed with many in this place. However, they have fouled the nest with the failure of life. Therefore, I gain no feathers with them. Sin contemplated this for a moment, and then nodded, even though he didn't quite understood Finch's colloquialism-laden answer. He had a general idea what Finch had said, but didn't feel like asking for a translation. If it had been important enough, Phylan would have said something. He knew this because Phylan and Finch were best friends, and understood each other perfectly, and thus needed no explanation of such strange sayings. But he was new here, and it'd take a bit of more time before he fully understood these unique alien wordplays. Even Phylan had used a few of them himself that Sin still hadn't yet deciphered the meaning of. As they continued to stroll gently through the gardens, Sin's bodyguards quietly shadowed them at a distance, keeping close enough to protect him if needed, yet remaining far enough away so as not to interfere with the adjutant president's work. As they did, Their eyes darted all around the arboretum, looking high and low for any signs of a possible ambush, or hints of foul play in the works. As Sin and the others continued to talk, one of the guards spotted something suspicious in a nearby line of bushes. But, before he could act, a group of masked men in green camouflage outfits sprung from their hiding places and raced at Sin and his party. Like cats to their prey, the guards pounced on them, quickly subduing or driving them back in rapid-fire order. Sin and the others stopped in surprise as the melee of attacker versus bodyguard quickly unfolded around them. Suddenly, two of the attackers broke through and charged straight at Phyland, knives held high over their heads. Sin watched in both horror and amazement as Phyland neither flinched nor ran, but instead shifted his body into a very unusual stance. However, the oddness of this posture quickly vanished from Sin's mind as Phyland disarmed the first attacker with deceptive ease, and sent him brutally crashing to the ground. He then took out the second attacker with speed unbecoming of someone his age. The blows came so fast, and so smoothly, that they didn't appear to do more than gently brush the man. Yet both attackers had quickly succumbed to the blows, and now lay still on the ground despite appearing to have only been touched lightly. The battle soon ended, and the few remaining attackers that hadn't been incapacitated already quickly fled or melted away into the surrounding foliage. But they didn't make it far before they were intercepted and arrested by UGW security guards who flooded into the garden in response to the attacks. Sin's eyes narrowed as he took note of the fact that, while they had responded, it wasn't until after the attacks were over. He then turned to check on Phyland and found him not only unharmed, but also not even the slightest bit winded. He pondered this with wonder as he remembered how easily his friend had neutralized the two attackers with what appeared to be only the slightest of effort. "Are you all right?" he asked. Phyland nodded as he bent down and removed the mask from one of the assailants. He cocked an eye in surprise. "A Cunoan. That's a surprise. I thought they detested violence," he said. Sin studied the man's face, and then noticed something. He bent down next to the Cunoan and rubbed his hand across the man's skin. He frowned. "He is not a Cunoan, but rather a Syrian." Phyland blinked and looked at Sin in surprise. "No, he's not. As you can see, he's clearly Cunoan." Sin shook his head. "He is what is known as a transform, a being who has been surgically and genetically modified and reprogrammed to serve as mercenaries and assassins in capacities similar to how they were used today. Under most circumstances they're nearly impossible to detect. However, no matter how well they may try, they can never hide this." He pointed to a small bump near the back of the man's jaw. "It's a neural control device. While they are able to change someone's appearance, they cannot reprogram their minds. Therefore, they use these devices to control their transforms from a distance, allowing them to complete their mission in total safety." "So they're essentially drones, right?" said Phyland. Sin nodded. "They are, and apparently whoever sent them wants you dead." "I do not believe that my Wingsanga was their intended target," said Finch. Both men looked curiously at the Fondo. "What are you saying?" asked Phyland. "The enemy attacked your blindness, Adjutant President. I have seen such strategies before on my world, and several others I have visited in my travels. They attack the weaker feather in order to draw away those who shield you so they may tear out your throat with their hidden talons. But they did not expect the strength of your wings to be so mighty. Had their plan worked, it would be you who would have been hurt, Adjutant President, and not my Wingsanga. They only attacked him because they could not get to you. Had they succeeded in hurting him, they would have then turned on you," said Finch. Sin contemplated this. "Then it seems I may have stepped on a tail I was not expecting to. You mentioned that these assassins were created by the Juana. Do you think they're working for the Varnock?" asked Phyland. Sin's eyes narrowed as he thought about this. "I'm not certain. At first I thought the Juana might be controlling the Varnock. But now it appears that I may have been wrong, as they both appear to be servants of the same unknown master, one whom we need to quickly discover the identity of. Such is possible, as there are more here who are of the shadows than those who are of trustworthy feathers and mighty wing," said Finch. "Yes, I am seeing that too." It's beginning to make this whole situation even more frightening, as we don't know all of whom we are dealing with. As such, if you will excuse me, I must brief my president. You should also inform your chancellor as well. Yeah, that might not be a bad idea, said Phyland. And what of the bodies? Asked Finch. Phyland frowned. We'll let security take care of that. The three of them then turned and slipped out of the gardens. As they walked down the hallway towards their respective offices, Sin thought about what had just happened, and then locked onto the strange and peculiar scene with Phyland and the two attackers he so expertly fended off. Ambassador, may I ask you a question? He said. Certainly. What's on your mind? Well, as we've been walking, a thought crossed my mind. Back in the gardens, two of the assailants who attacked us broke through my security and charged straight at you. But, instead of you becoming a victim, you moved with a grace and form that I have not seen in a human before. Especially one of your age, he said. You saw that, laughed Phyland. I did. Can you explain what it was I saw? Phyland smiled. Well, there's a bit of a story behind that. My father was the chief martial arts instructor for the fleet for nearly 3 decades. As such, he drilled me in the combat arts from the time I could first walk until I left for college and struck out on my own, achieving the rank of Grand Master along the way. Eventually, though, I went into politics and civilian service, just to get away from all the constant training. The odd part is, despite doing that, I never forgot my training. In fact, I've clung to my father's regimens with a strictness that would make him proud, even today. For some reason I find them relaxing, and they help me unwind whenever I have a really long, hard day. As such, those things have become second nature to me, and kept me much healthier as a result. Sin chuckled. I guess that makes you more of a fighter than I expected. Phyland laughed. In some ways, it does.